The Silent Architecture of Respect. A Machiavellian Chronicle. Introduction. The Price of Tolerance Throughout the Annals of Power. From the marble halls of Renaissance Florence to the boardrooms of our modern age, one truth has echoed across centuries with unwavering clarity. The manner in which you respond to disrespect determines not merely how one person perceives you, but how the entire world learns to approach you. This is not a story about vengeance, nor is it a manual for cruelty. Rather, it is a chronicle of something far more profound. The ancient art of commanding respect through strategic silence, calculated withdrawal, and the kind of presence that requires no announcement. In the shadowed corridors where Niccolò Machiavelli once walked, observing the rise and fall of princes, the betrayal of allies, and the collapse of those who mistook kindness for weakness, a philosophy was forged in the furnace of harsh reality. That philosophy whispers to us still, across the gulf of 500 years, reminding us that respect is never simply given. It must be architecturally constructed, stone by deliberate stone, through choices made in moments when others expect us to falter. What you are about to discover is not theory. It is the distilled wisdom of countless power struggles, translated into a framework for the modern soul who refuses to be diminished. This is the story of how silence becomes a weapon, how stillness transforms into strength, and how the person who masters their reactions ultimately masters the room itself. The whispered beginning every violation of respect announces itself quietly at first, a murmured comment delivered with a poisoned smile, an inflection in someone's voice that carries contempt beneath its casual surface, a glance that lingers just long enough to communicate dismissal, or perhaps a jest made at your expense while others watch to gauge your reaction. In these opening moments, most souls make their fatal error. They dismiss it. They rationalize it away with thoughts like, "Perhaps I misunderstood," or "It's not worth creating tension." Over such a small thing, they convince themselves that rising above it demonstrates maturity. But here lies the ancient trap that has ensnared countless individuals throughout history. Disrespect left unchallenged becomes disrespect sanctioned. When you allow that first boundary to be crossed without consequence, you have unwittingly sent an invitation into the world, announcing that your dignity can be tested without cost. The insult returns, but this time amplified, delivered with more confidence, executed before a larger audience, spoken with the assured tone of someone who has already learned you will absorb the blow. By the time the violation has grown bold enough that you finally feel compelled to address it, the damage has already crystallized into perception. You are no longer defending a boundary. You are attempting to reconstruct one that has already been demolished in the minds of everyone watching. The room has reached its verdict. You are someone whose limits can be pushed, whose silence signals acceptance rather than strategy. Machiavelli, that keen observer of human nature in its rawest form, understood this mechanism with crystalline clarity. In his world, where power was not an abstract concept, but the difference between life and death, between ruling and being exiled, he recognized that reputation functions as invisible armor. Respect, he knew, is not a medal bestowed upon the virtuous by grateful admirers. It is a territory you claim and then defend with every subsequent interaction. A boundary you establish not through proclamation, but through measured response. When someone shows you disrespect, the next move you make echoes far beyond that single moment. It teaches not only the person who crossed you, but every observer in proximity, exactly how they should calculate their approach to you in the future. This is because disrespect, in its initial form, rarely stems from personal animosity. It emerges as an experiment, a probe designed to map the geography of your limits. If you fail this test, if you laugh nervously, if you explain away your discomfort, if you continue as though nothing happened, you have provided them with crucial intelligence. You can be disrespected safely. Therefore, when someone violates your boundary, the response must be immediate. Not tomorrow, not after you've processed your feelings, not once you've gathered your thoughts and prepared an eloquent rebuttal. The moment demands action in its present form, and that action begins not with words, but with withdrawal. The first law, strategic silence. Here emerges the first principle in the Machiavellian approach to handling disrespect. And it contradicts almost everything our modern culture preaches about communication and confrontation. The individual who responds with raw emotion hemorrhages status in real time, while the person who retreats strategically transforms into something far more unsettling, an unpredictable variable. And unpredictability, properly wielded, generates a particular species of caution that closely resembles fear. Understand this crucial distinction. Silence does not mean pretending the violation never occurred. It does not involve brushing aside the comment with a forced laugh or changing the subject to spare everyone discomfort. Strategic silence means the deliberate withdrawal of your energy from the interaction. You cease feeding the dynamic they attempted to create. You do not defend yourself. Do not explain how their words affected you. Do not justify your worthiness of better treatment. Instead, you create what might be described as a gravitational collapse in the conversation. A sudden absence where your warmth and engagement previously existed. This manifests in your gaze, which may linger on them for one beat longer than comfortable before moving away, communicating that you have registered something important. It appears in your tone, which cools several degrees in an instant. It reveals itself in your refusal to continue contributing energy to the exchange they initiated. This technique functions as a disruption in the social rhythm they were orchestrating. They made their move expecting a particular response, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps defensive anger, perhaps nervous laughter designed to diffuse tension. What they encounter instead is a sudden void, a coldness that seems to emanate from you without any overt hostility. The conversation they thought they controlled has developed a fault line, and they can feel it, even if they cannot immediately articulate what has shifted. The psychological mechanism at work here is profound. Disrespect survives only when it receives some form of response that keeps the dynamic alive. Whether that response comes as laughter from onlookers, visible discomfort from the target, or defensive explanations that inadvertently validate the attack, the disrespect requires feedback to justify itself. When it encounters instead a wall of still coldness, it stands exposed as what it truly is, a desperate bid for dominance by someone who doubts their own position. Machiavelli himself rarely struck the opening blow in any conflict. His genius lay in observation, in allowing his adversaries to fully reveal their intentions, their strategies, their weaknesses before he ever committed to a response. When he finally did act, it was never with apology or hesitation. His moves carried the precision of a surgeon's blade, removing exactly what needed to be removed, while leaving everything else intact. This becomes your template. You do not react in the heat of the moment with whatever words first rush to your tongue. You grow still. You allow the weight of your silence to settle over the interaction, like frost forming on glass. And in that frozen moment, everyone present, the person who disrespected you, the witnesses, perhaps even you yourself, understands that something fundamental has changed, though none may yet comprehend exactly what. The surgical question, your next maneuver, once you have established that crucial silence, involves a technique that appears deceptively simple, but requires substantial inner discipline to execute effectively. You mirror back the violation, not through matching insults or equivalent retaliation, but through the piercing clarity of a well-placed question. The individual who showed you disrespect has made certain assumptions about how this interaction will unfold. They expect you to absorb the blow and move forward, or perhaps to react emotionally in a way that makes you appear oversensitive or unable to handle social friction. What they have not prepared for is exposure. They have not anticipated that their veiled aggression might be dragged into the light and examined publicly. So you hold their gaze, and this detail matters more than you might initially recognize. Eye contact in this moment is not aggressive. It is steady, curious almost, as though you are studying something mildly perplexing. You might tilt your head slightly, a gesture that communicates genuine contemplation rather than challenge. And then you deliver one of these surgical inquiries with absolute calm. Did you intend for that to sound the way it came across? Or perhaps, you're certain you want to express that thought again? Or possibly, that comment seemed unusually personal. Would you care to clarify your meaning before I form my response? Each of these questions functions as a controlled incision into the interaction. You are not denying that an attack occurred. You are not defending yourself against it. Instead, you are doing something far more powerful. You are inviting them to own their aggression publicly. To repeat it now that everyone's attention has been focused directly on the exchange. To commit fully to the disrespect now that it has been identified as such. The brilliance of this approach reveals itself in what happens next. Most individuals who engage in disrespect are not actually bold. They are opportunistic, They probe boundaries to identify who will check their behavior and who will absorb it without consequence. They operate in the gray areas of social interaction where insults can be disguised as jokes, where dismissiveness can be attributed to misunderstanding, where aggression can hide behind the excuse of just being honest. When you respond to their probe with tense silence, followed by a calm question that demands they either own their behavior or retreat from it, you have eliminated all that protective gray area. Suddenly, they must make a choice. Escalate by repeating the disrespect now that it has been named, or retreat by claiming they were misunderstood. Either option has consequences that benefit you. If they escalate, they have now committed to their aggression in a way that cannot be explained away. Every witness has heard the disrespect stated clearly twice, and your restraint in simply asking for clarification makes their hostility appear disproportionate and unprovoked. If they retreat, claiming misunderstanding or joking intent, they have just demonstrated that your boundary has teeth. They tested it, and it pushed back, and they chose not to press further. In that moment of their hesitation, you have created something invaluable: doubt. They begin to question whether you are someone whose boundaries can be crossed casually. They wonder what you might do if pushed further. They recalculate their assessment of you, adjusting their internal map of who poses social risk and who can be dismissed without concern. This doubt serves as your true objective. Not revenge, not public humiliation, not even explicit acknowledgement of wrongdoing. You seek only to plant uncertainty in their mind about what happens when they cross you. Because the person who generates doubt in others, who causes people to pause, to reconsider their words, to correct themselves before speaking, that person no longer needs to demand respect. They have become someone around whom respect manifests automatically. The deeper game: consistency and reframing. Most individuals possess the capacity to handle a single confrontation, one moment where they must establish or defend a boundary. What separates those who are perpetually disrespected from those who command lasting respect is not the intensity of their initial response, but rather the consistency of their enforcement over time. If someone crosses your boundary once, and you handle it with the strategic silence and surgical clarity we have discussed, you have won a battle. But if you then allow your energy to soften again, days or weeks later, if you signal through your renewed warmth and accessibility that the incident has been forgotten, and all consequences have evaporated, you have created an opening. They will test you again. Perhaps not in the same way. They have learned that particular approach carries risk, but they will probe differently, searching for the angle that you might have left unguarded. Therefore, the third essential step in this framework requires that you immediately reframe the entire relationship. You do not return to the previous normal. You do not behave as though the incident can be swept away by time or forced civility. You redraw the boundaries in how you communicate, how you present yourself, and most critically, in how unavailable you suddenly become. Machiavelli recognized that public punishment, when it is justified and executed with precise timing, accomplishes two objectives simultaneously. It eliminates an immediate threat, and it educates everyone who witnesses the consequence. If the disrespect you experienced occurred in front of others, then your new posture must echo throughout that same social space, speaking more powerfully than any verbal comeback could achieve. You withdraw your warmth from them, not with obvious hostility, but with cool formality. You sharpen your language when addressing them, choosing words that maintain politeness while eliminating any trace of personal connection. You refuse their invitations to lunch, to collaboration, to casual conversation, without providing detailed explanations. The shift does not require announcement. They will feel it in every interaction that follows. This separation of the respected from the routinely ignored reveals itself not through dominance by intimidation, but through presence grounded in principle. You have demonstrated to the room a clear message: I am not available for that treatment, and I will not explain myself or negotiate my boundaries to make anyone comfortable about this decision. The social dynamics begin to flow differently after this reframing takes hold. Other people take careful note of what occurred. They observe that disrespecting you carries a tangible cost. Not violence, not dramatic confrontation, but something perhaps more uncomfortable. Permanent coolness, withdrawn access, the transformation from friendly to formal. They become more cautious in how they speak to you, more calculated in their humor, more measured in their criticism. Your name begins to accumulate certain associations in their minds. They describe you to others as someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect, or a person who won't engage if you cross them, or you only get one chance with them. These associations become your social armor. You did not request this reputation. You constructed it through consistent action, one surgical response at a time. And here lies the distinction that changes everything. You are not the loudest person in the room. You are not the one who needs to remind everyone of your boundaries through constant verbal enforcement. You have simply demonstrated, through your controlled silence, your piercing questions, and your total refusal to prioritize others' comfort over your self-respect, exactly what happens the moment someone disrespects you. Not with noise, not with aggression, but with disciplined withdrawal and absolute command of your own presence. That is how you extinguish disrespect before it can establish roots, not through anger or ego, but through precisely what they did not anticipate: discipline, distance, and total control over how you allocate your energy and attention. The signal probe disrespect never exists in isolation. It functions as a signal flare, a probe, a calculated flick designed to determine how far someone can reach into your space before you establish a firm perimeter. Once you permit a single violation, whether it appears as an insult wrapped in humor, a subtle dismissal of your contribution, or a false compliment that conceals venom in its undertone, you have delivered a lesson to everyone present about what your silence will tolerate. Machiavelli would remind you of this harsh reality. Once they perceive you as someone easily violated, the effort required to reclaim control doubles, triples, or becomes impossible altogether. Your initial failure to enforce consequences establishes a precedent that echoes through all future interactions. In the aftermath of that first encounter, after you have deployed your strategic stillness, identified the violation through calm questioning, and created distance, what transpires next holds equal importance. Because people will test your boundaries again. They must confirm whether you truly meant what your actions communicated, or whether your response was merely a temporary mood that has since passed. These secondary tests arrive in subtler, more corrosive forms. They joke again, but this time accompanied by an innocent smile that dares you to call it out. They exclude you from a decision, then label it an oversight when confronted. They deliver a passive comment and watch your face with predatory attention, seeking even the smallest flicker of hesitation that might indicate your boundary has softened. This moment calls for your second major strategic move. Reinforce the established frame through disproportionate consequence. Machiavelli's philosophy was never constructed on principles of fairness or proportional response. It was built on effectiveness, on results, on the brutal calculus of what actually works in the messy reality of human social dynamics. He understood something that contemporary culture actively resists acknowledging. If the punishment equals the offense, it becomes forgettable. But when the consequence exceeds the violation, it transforms into something unforgettable. You are not reacting from raw emotion when you deploy disproportionate consequence. You are transmitting a clear message. You do not get to experiment with crossing me twice. You do not get to test whether my boundary was real or performative. When they cross that line again, you grow colder, not louder. If their second violation occurred publicly, you return the message publicly as well, but always strategically. Never through matching insults or obvious retaliation. You respond through surgical rejection. Perhaps they make a comment directed at you in a group setting. You pause, establishing that powerful silence once more, then look them directly in the eye before addressing the rest of the group as though they had not spoken. You have erased them from the conversation without acknowledging that erasure. Or they ask you a question, seeking to re-establish normal interaction. You provide a single-word answer, then immediately shift your attention elsewhere, demonstrating that they no longer warrant extended engagement. Or they attempt to reclaim your warmth through friendly gesture or invitation. You respond with the social equivalent of a locked door. Polite, formal, distant, but utterly impenetrable. This is not aggression. This is removal. You are not attempting to defeat them in combat. You are demonstrating something far more chilling. They have lost access. And for most people, this loss strikes deeper than any insult possibly could. Being insulted can be worn as a badge, can be complained about, can be used to generate sympathy from others. But being ignored by someone who used to acknowledge you, Being excluded from energy you once took for granted, that creates a particular species of discomfort that cannot be easily remedied or explained away. The failure point. The need to be liked here. Most people stumble and fall. They yearn to be liked. They hunger for social harmony. They want to believe that being the bigger person, extending forgiveness, smoothing over rough edges. They want to believe these actions will earn them admiration and restore peace. Machiavelli would find bitter amusement in this belief, because respect does not flow from forgiveness. Respect is earned through calculated consequence delivered with silence rather than anger. Forgiveness without consequence teaches only one lesson. Boundaries can be crossed without meaningful cost, provided enough time passes. When you forgive before establishing consequence, you have given them permission to test again. You have revealed that your boundaries have expiration dates, that your memory is short, that your need for social comfort exceeds your commitment to self-respect. But here is where your true leverage begins to accumulate. People are always watching. They witnessed the moment of disrespect. They observed how you responded initially, and now they are monitoring to determine whether you will revert to your previous warmth, or whether you truly meant what your new distance projected. This ongoing observation presents your opportunity to reshape your image entirely. Because image, according to Machiavelli, wields more power than truth itself. What people believe about you creates more real-world consequences than what is objectively accurate about you. Your image following a conflict becomes either armor that protects you or exposure that invites further attacks. You want your sustained silence and distance to be interpreted as, he doesn't tolerate being disrespected, or she refuses to engage with people who cross her, or you genuinely only get one chance with them. When your name begins carrying these associations, the entire social landscape around you transforms. People speak more carefully when you are present. They stop making casual jokes at your expense. They monitor their tone. When introducing you to others, they include descriptions like no nonsense, sharp, intense, or someone you don't mess with. This reputation becomes your new power. You did not petition for it. You did not campaign for it. You built it brick by brick, one surgical response at a time. Through consistent refusal to tolerate disrespect, regardless of who delivered it, or how minor it might have seemed. The escalator. Those who thrive on disruption. Yet there exists another layer, something more challenging and more dangerous, because some individuals will not be deterred by public shame or social consequence. They do not care about group approval. They are not seeking acceptance. What they want is your reaction itself. They thrive on destabilizing others, on being the disruptor, on testing boundaries not for personal gain but for the sport of it. When these particular individuals encounter someone like you, someone who has established firm boundaries through strategic silence and disproportionate consequence, they face an internal decision point: escalate or retreat. Entirely. If they choose escalation, that becomes your signal to deploy the third level of response. Leverage their disrespect against them. You do not escalate emotionally, matching their energy or allowing anger to drive your choices. Instead, you escalate socially. You begin to frame their behavior with surgical precision, using their own actions as the weapon that diminishes them. If this person holds any position of influence, reputation, or authority, you start spotlighting their behavior in ways that force others to reconsider their assessment of this individual. The technique requires control and precision, but it is devastatingly effective. For instance, when they make one of their disrespectful comments, you might respond with, "That's a fascinating joke. Do you use that same humor in your professional settings too?" The question appears innocent, even curious, but it has just connected their behavior to their professional reputation, forcing everyone listening to suddenly imagine this person behaving this way in contexts where it would be entirely unacceptable. Or you might say, "If you speak to your friends this way, I'm genuinely curious how you address strangers." Again, the tone remains calm, almost anthropological in its detachment. But you have just reframed their behavior from edgy humor to pattern of disrespect that extends across all relationships. Or perhaps, I'm surprised you felt comfortable saying that aloud in this group. Simple, direct, no insult delivered. But you have just made them wear their own words in front of witnesses. And now those words feel heavier, more problematic, less defensible. You are not arguing with them. You are spotlighting them. You are illuminating their behavior so thoroughly that the room cannot help but see it clearly, perhaps for the first time. This is when their confidence begins to erode. Not because you overpowered them through aggression or intimidation, but because you made the room remember what they truly are beneath the performance. Small, noisy, insecure, desperate for the reaction they cannot extract from you. This represents the power of Machiavellian retaliation properly executed. It never arrives loud. It never rushes forward in obvious attack. Instead, it is measured, targeted, and delivered with such composed precision that the other person often does not realize how completely they have been checkmated until long after the exchange has concluded. And the most beautiful element of this approach, you remain calm throughout. You maintain your poise. You have allowed the disrespect to hang in the air just long enough to be noticed, then collapsed it into something they now own, something that reflects poorly on them rather than on you. Building power in silence. This is how you construct power within silence, not merely by refusing to react, but by transforming every act of disrespect into a step toward their own exposure. In doing so, you never need to chase respect again. Because now everyone present understands. You don't argue, you don't explain, you don't tolerate. You end it quietly, surgically, and permanently. What most people fundamentally misunderstand is this. Disrespect does not thrive on boldness. It thrives on safety. Not your safety, but theirs. They insult you when they believe you will not respond effectively. They mock you when they are confident there will be no meaningful consequence. They push boundaries because past experience has taught them you have never pushed back with sufficient force to create lasting deterrence. That assumption of safety fuels most disrespect. The calculation that you won't do anything significant, that you will absorb the blow and continue forward, that your boundaries are negotiable rather than absolute. But Machiavelli understood something different, something that shifts the entire dynamic. Power is not about striking frequently. It is about creating the pervasive sense that you could strike at any moment, that you might respond in ways they cannot predict or contain. This is the next evolution. You become a threat without ever threatening. You do not need to speak menacing words or make promises of retaliation. You simply need to become harder to predict, impossible to map. From this point forward, when someone disrespects you after you have already established where your boundaries exist, your responsibility is not to make them like you. Your task is to make them uncertain of you. Not frightened, not intimidated, but genuinely unsure about what exists behind your controlled exterior. Their minds begin generating questions. Did I push too far? Why is he so quiet right now? What is she thinking behind that calm expression? Why didn't they respond the way they did before? What happens if I push again? This uncertainty becomes your shield and your sword simultaneously. The person they feel unsure about becomes the person they begin avoiding. They self-correct around you without needing to be told. They edit their words before speaking them. They reconsider jokes before delivering them. This is why Machiavelli warned against being too transparent, too consistent, too easily read. A ruler who is simple to understand becomes simple to manipulate. People learn your patterns, predict your responses, and navigate around your boundaries with increasing confidence. But when you remain silent when expected to speak, when you respond with surgical coldness once, and then retreat again into stillness when your reactions cannot be predicted based on previous patterns, you transform into an anomaly. And in social settings, anomalies shift underlying dynamics. The human mind naturally protects itself from what it cannot fully understand. When people cannot predict you, they instinctively begin deferring to you, not from fear, but from the brain's fundamental drive to avoid uncertain threats. You lean into this psychological reality. You do not talk as much as others in the room. You observe longer than feels comfortable to those being observed. You say less than others expect, but when you finally speak, every word seems to land with unusual weight. The psychological twist. From liked to felt. Here emerges the psychological twist that changes everything. Most people believe respect flows from being liked. It does not. Respect comes from being felt. When you enter a room and the atmosphere changes, when people lower their voices mid-conversation, when posture shifts and tone adjusts, that is not popularity. That is presence. And presence is built through contradiction and controlled unpredictability. You do not always respond, but when you do, it cuts deep. You do not need to dominate every interaction, but you absolutely refuse to be crossed. You never ask for respect directly, but you immediately remove access the moment respect is violated. That is how your energy becomes a warning. A silent, unspoken consequence wrapped in layers of calm control. But there exists a final transformation, something few ever achieve. You stop reacting to disrespect as though it is personal. You begin treating it as information. This is where your consciousness separates from the average person. They hear an insult and experience pain, then scramble to respond to that pain. You hear disrespect and think, there is the weak spot in them. There is what they are insecure about. There is the territory where they feel threatened. You do not flinch because you see through the surface of the insult to the need driving it. Every act of disrespect reveals the person delivering it. Insecurity, jealousy, fear, projection, desperate attempts to assert control in spaces where they feel they have none. That is the final twist of power. When someone shows you disrespect, it exposes them, not you. So you log the information. You remember it. And you move forward, not by forgiving in the traditional sense, but by calculating, do they still deserve access to you? Should they be isolated publicly or privately? Can you use their behavior to send a message to others, or is it more powerful to let them disappear quietly? You are no longer playing emotional chess, reacting to feelings as they arise. You are orchestrating position, moving pieces across a board only you can fully see. And as Machiavelli taught, the most powerful position is one where others fear violating your boundary even when you are not physically present. That is when you have truly won. Not when people admire you, not when they praise you to your face, but when your absence carries the same weight as your presence. The people who never experience disrespect are not always the loudest or most aggressive. They are the ones who have made disrespect too expensive. Not through rage, not through revenge, but through disciplined silence, disproportionate consequence, and unapologetic self-enforcement. You no longer play the social game by their rules, attempting to fit in and be liked by everyone. You play the power game instead. And when you commit to that different game entirely, everything transforms. People hesitate before crossing you. Their jokes shift in tone when you are present. Their words soften. Their energy recalibrates automatically, because now they know you are not here to fit into their social structure. You are here to be respected. And if they cannot deliver that respect, you will leave them in a silence they will not recover from. The room recalibrates. There comes a moment in every power dynamic, subtle but undeniable, when the room recalibrates around you. It happens after the silence, after the boundary enforcement, after you have made it clear without explicit words that you are not the kind of person who tolerates being crossed. The change is not that people stop disrespecting you. The transformation goes deeper. They stop thinking they could. And that is the final layer Machiavelli would insist upon. You do not simply respond to disrespect as it arrives. You transform what you represent in their collective mind. Because ultimately, power is not about your reactions. It is about what people assume you would do, even if you say nothing at all. You become someone whose limits are unknown, whose silence does not signal submission, but rather preparation, whose calm is not friendliness, but containment of something they do not wish to encounter. And here is what most miss. Once you have enforced a boundary one time, that is not the end of the process. That is your reputation test, not merely with the individual who disrespected you, but with every single person who witnessed the interaction directly or heard about it indirectly. Because the moment someone crosses you publicly, everyone else watches to determine whether your value is self-regulated or dependent on audience approval. If you hold your frame under pressure without exploding, without apologizing, without seeking validation from others, they feel something they cannot easily describe. They feel certainty, and certainty is the rarest trait in a world addicted to approval. Desperate for likes, constantly seeking external validation. Now, this does not require being cold or hostile in every interaction. It means your warmth becomes a choice rather than a default state. You smile when you want to smile. You speak when you decide the conversation merits your contribution. You grant access only to those who have proven they do not take it for granted. This is how you become untouchable. Not through physical power or threats of violence, but through energetic value. And energetic value is built through subtraction. You subtract reactivity, neediness, over-explaining, justifying your presence, tolerating even 1% of disrespect masked as just joking around, and the assumption that you owe anyone your energy simply because they demand it. That is when you begin attracting a new level of response. The room slows when you enter. People do not interrupt you mid-sentence. They repeat your words later because they were measured and few. You are no longer someone navigating social terrain, trying to find your place within the existing structure. You have become the terrain itself. You are the geography around which others must navigate. Machiavelli's most brutal insight. And here is where Machiavelli's most brutal insight becomes relevant. Men must be either respected or eliminated. In modern translation, this means either people understand your value and treat you accordingly, or they no longer get access to it. It is not about revenge or holding grudges. It is about consequence without drama. The people who disrespect you once and then never attempt it again are not the problem. They are the lesson, both for themselves and for others watching. They tested a boundary, encountered a firm response, and adjusted their behavior accordingly. But the ones who disrespect you again, subtly, repeatedly, manipulatively, probing for weaknesses in your resolve, those are the individuals you do not correct further. You vanish from their world. Or worse for them, you rise in power and influence while they fade into irrelevance, because in your silence, you exposed them. And in your distance, you reminded them you were never accessible to begin with. They were simply being tolerated, and that tolerance has reached its end. Once you have made this shift, your entire posture toward the world changes permanently. You no longer try to be liked by everyone. You no longer respond to indirect attacks or passive-aggressive comments. You no longer feel the compulsion to prove that you are the bigger person, because you have realized something Machiavelli knew 500 years ago. You never have to defend what you will not allow to be touched in the first place. They cannot disrespect you if they cannot reach you. They cannot undermine you if you never stood on their approval to begin with. They cannot provoke you if your silence makes them question their own status rather than yours. This is the apex of psychological dominance, not cruelty, not pride, not aggression, but control. Control over what you react to. Control over what energy you return into the social space. And control over who even gets the opportunity to see your reaction in the first place. That is how rulers moved in Machiavelli's world of Renaissance Italy, where a single miscalculation could result in exile or assassination. And that is how you move in your world now. Not with rage, not with noise, not with public displays of dominance, but with a presence so disciplined, so exacting, so clearly bounded that violating it once is all anyone needs to learn their lesson. Because after that moment, you do not just gain respect from individuals, you become the standard by which everyone else measures their own behavior. Your name becomes a reference point. Don't do that. They won't tolerate it, or watch your tone around them, or that's someone you don't test. The final move. Mercy without warmth. Now, we arrive at one final move. The moment when someone has disrespected you and subsequently realizes it was a mistake. You stand at a crossroads. You could punish them. You could forgive them. But Machiavelli would suggest something more powerful than either option. You do something that reshapes the narrative itself. When someone disrespects you, and then realizes they have made an error in judgment, what do? This question defines legacy, because at that point, you are no longer simply reacting to an attack. You are shaping perception. You are sculpting the story that will be told about you. You are deciding who they become in the aftermath, and more importantly, who you become. Here is the final Machiavellian truth. Mercy can be more terrifying than punishment itself. Because mercy, when delivered without warmth, carries with it a message that chills deeper than any retaliation. You are no longer a threat to me. You have become irrelevant. That is how you finish this particular game. After you have enforced the boundary with strategic silence, after you have withdrawn your presence deliberately, after you have held frame in complete stillness and allowed the silence to echo through every subsequent interaction, they may come back. They may apologize, stumbling over words they did not expect to have to say. They may overcompensate with excessive friendliness. They may laugh nervously, attempting to return to the previous normal, testing whether the ice has melted. And here, in this precise moment, you wield ultimate control. You do not lash out at them. You do not smile and accept them back into warmth. You do not comfort them, or make it easier for them to feel better about what they did. You simply remain unchanged. No bitterness in your voice, no resentment in your eyes. No need to explain why you are different. Now, or what they must do to restore what was lost. You let them walk around. In the new reality you have created, the reality where your gaze no longer searches for their presence when they enter a room, where your energy no longer adjusts to accommodate theirs, where they are no longer a variable that matters in your world, but rather a ghost drifting through it. This is not pettiness. This is power by absence, because nothing disturbs someone who tried to shake your frame more than discovering you were never depending on them in the first place. You were never looking for their validation. You were never seeking their approval or belonging. You were never operating under their rules. And that realization, that they could not touch you in any way that mattered, becomes the final cut. When they realize that not only did their disrespect fail to wound you, it actually elevated you. It made you sharper, more respected by others, more distant, and ultimately, more untouchable than before they ever spoke. This is the role Machiavelli would have you play in the theater of power. Not the vengeful prince who punishes every slight with theatrical retaliation, but the silent architect of consequence, someone who allows others to betray themselves in public while you remain calm, calculated, and perpetually just out of reach. The one who never demands respect because everyone already knows the truth. You only make that mistake once with them. There are no second chances disguised as forgiveness. There is only the permanent shift in how you allocate your attention and energy. The aftermath. Your name in whispers. In the aftermath of these interactions, you will notice something strange beginning to occur. Your name starts circulating in whispers, not because of drama or public confrontations, but because of your restraint. People begin saying things about you in your absence, describing you to others who have not yet encountered you. They say things like, "He doesn't say much." But when he does, people listen. Or, "I've never seen her lose her composure. Not once." Or, "You don't want to be on their bad side. Trust me." Or, "Be careful with that one. They don't come back around if you cross them." That is what you have built through this process. A reputation so solid that people self-correct around you without needing to be told. They double-check their tone before speaking. They review their phrasing before making jokes. They ask themselves if you are watching, not out of fear exactly, but because your energy now comes with weight that cannot be ignored. From that point forward, you no longer have to fight for respect in individual battles. You have proven something rarer than dominance, something more valuable than popularity. You have mastered selective presence. You show up when you choose to. You speak when it matters. You invest your energy where it will be valued. And when you leave, whether from a conversation, a social dynamic, a professional relationship, or a personal connection, they feel it. The absence creates a void, because the person who cannot be disrespected is not the loudest voice in the room. They are not the most aggressive or intimidating presence. They are the one whose attention is no longer guaranteed, whose energy must be earned rather than expected, whose warmth has become a privilege rather than a default. So, let them talk among themselves. Let them speculate and guess. Let them wonder what you will do next, how you will respond, whether you have truly moved on or are simply waiting for the right moment. Because they already know the truth, even if they do not speak it aloud, if they cross the line you have drawn, you will not explain yourself. You will not argue your position. You will not chase them or beg for acknowledgement. You will simply disappear from their world. And that silence, that permanent, unyielding silence, will echo in their minds louder than any comeback, any insult, any retaliation ever could. The architecture complete. And so the architecture is complete, not built in a single moment, but constructed piece by piece through every interaction where you chose discipline over reaction, distance over desperation, and self-respect over the temporary comfort of being liked. You have become someone whose boundaries are visible only when crossed, whose power is felt most strongly in absence, and whose respect is commanded not through words, but through the unmistakable weight of consistent action. The whisper that began this journey, that first moment of disrespect, that test, that probe, has been answered, not with the explosion they expected, not with the weakness they hoped to find, but with something they could never have anticipated. A silence so profound, so complete, so strategically deployed, that it has restructured the entire social landscape around you. You are no longer navigating their world. They are navigating yours. And that shift, that fundamental reversal of power, came not from raising your voice, but from controlling exactly when and how you choose to use it. This is the silent architecture of respect, built not from the materials of aggression or dominance, but from the far stronger elements of discipline, distance, and the unwavering knowledge that your dignity is not negotiable. Machiavelli understood this truth 5 centuries ago in the political courts of Florence. And now you understand it too, in whatever arena you find yourself. The person who controls their response controls the outcome. The person who masters silence masters the room. And the person who knows their worth never has to announce it. They simply live it, and the world adjusts accordingly, forever.